Hi there. Hello, everyone. We will give everyone a moment or two just to gather, and then we will get started promptly. Okay. Josh, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 2026 Macro Trends event, Navigating Bifurcation, Market Shifts, and the Personalization Era. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here. Before we get started, I wanted to just share a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, we do have a tight 60-minute webinar prepared for you today, and it consists of 40 minutes of content followed by a brief panel discussion. So we promise to get you to your next commitment on time. We do ask if you have any questions at all, please drop them into the chat, and we'll get back to you promptly with answers after the presentation. So again, welcome. So excited to be here with all of you. Thanks for sharing your time and sharing your lunch hour. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. So first, our agenda. We will start by digging into bifurcation and uncertainty. What are the forces reshaping markets, media, and consumer behavior in real time? Next, we'll explore the new consumer and brand reality, how expectations, trust, and decision-making are evolving, and what that means for brand growth. And then we'll shift into personalization, considering that it's not just a tactic, but thinking of it as a strategic imperative that's necessary in a fragmented landscape. And then we're going to bring it all together for you with a panel discussion at the end focused on what's next for marketers. Our goal is to leave you with clarity, with perspective, and certainly with practical direction for navigating what's ahead. So let's get started. First, just to introduce myself, my name's Jen Harlacker, COO here at Harmelin, and I am thrilled to introduce to you our team of presenters for today, starting with Bernie Shimkus. He's our VP of Research. Shayna Gannon, manager on the business strategy team. Gwen Lovekin, director on the business strategy team. You'll also hear from Sarah Gray. She's a senior strategist in our strategic planning group. Dan Delozier will focus on media implications, and he's an AVP in our digital strategy group. And then finally, Dan Cox will lead our panel discussion. Dan is SVP strategic planning. So let's get started digging into bifurcation and uncertainty. So in thinking about bifurcation, I ask you to consider that as uncertainty becomes the norm, the marketplace is splitting along economic lines. So that's reshaping how different consumers prioritize, decide, and define value. Some key considerations when we think about economic bifurcation. First, as the income gap widens, divide between affluent and then value-driven households accelerates. Uncertainty is becoming the norm, and that's driving cautious spending and heightened daily trade-offs. And then think about affluent consumers. They will continue to spend, but with elevated expectations around value and experience. So I'll kick this over to Bernie to dig into those details.
Thank you, Jen. That was really a very good overview of this trend. So what are the two consumer realities that Jen alluded to in that overview, and why should we be concerned about them? Well, as you can see in this chart, the US has entered into what has been called a K-shaped recovery or a K-shaped economy starting in the middle of 2025, and that has extended into the early part of 2026. Both wage growth and consumer spending have splintered, with one set of households, the upper income households denoted here, spending at a greater rate and with less concern than another set of households that are spending rates are basically very low or non-existent as far as growth is concerned. The data here is from the Bank of America Institute, and we see that in that highest income tertile, growth was about or approached 3%, while the lower income tertile was again basically flat. But again, it's important to remember that these are growth rates. Both groups are still making purchases. It is with the rate and the reasons and the motivations behind them that have changed. And that's why companies need to find ways to effectively communicate with both the value-seeking shoppers as well as the higher-end premium shoppers who are looking for something extra in their purchase decisions. Now, in their end of year research, Bank of America also broke out spend and how it's changed for select categories from a share of wallet standpoint compared with 5 years ago. And these charts clearly show that this bifurcation exists. The higher income groups on the left have a more focused spend, or excuse me, the lower income groups on the left have a higher, more focused spend and devoting much more of their budgets to necessities and have less for some of the tertiary examples that are listed here. And households on the right from higher income segments have more discretionary money and are allocating a larger percentage of things to travel and restaurants and what can be dubbed just generally more indulgent experiences. And these divergences extend beyond the behaviors or categories listed here. In fact, the polarization that we see in the K-shaped economy extends to consumer attitudes as well. And we also see it in various service-oriented priorities that consumers are looking for as they make purchases. On this slide, with data pulled from Nielsen's IQ Consumer Outlook for 2026, we see that this divergence in priority as it relates to digital shopping features. Nielsen has segmented the consumers into two groups here, thrivers and strugglers. And the strugglers are designated by the blue bars. And as you can see on the left, the priorities for them are much more savings-oriented. Things like free delivery or price discounts, which had the greatest differential with the other segment, are very different than the ones on the right for the thrivers, who rate other digital shopping features as very important, including things like personalized product recommendations and accessibility to voice commands and other items where the differential between the two groups is highest. And rather than focus on these specific items or percentages, I think the big takeaway to focus is that there is this divergence of attitudes and preferences that exist across not only the retail channel, but others. And it is critical for marketers to understand how their own existing customers or their desired customer base can be segmented along these same kind of lines if they're going to effectively communicate with them. Now, I wanted to shift gears just a little bit and talk about another discrepancy that we're seeing in consumer behaviors, or what we've titled here kind of feelings versus behavior. And the chart illustrates here is the consumer sentiment as tracked by the University of Michigan Survey of Consumers throughout 2025. And there is a clear downward trend throughout that period, which would have been expected to have a rather rough holiday sales period. Yet by most accounts, end-of-year sales were extremely strong, boosted by deep discounts, payment options like buy now, pay later, as well as some help from AI-assisted shopping tools. Bottom line, the spending was way more resilient than what was forecast for. And that leads you to think, well, what can we expect for the rest of 2026? Will consumer spend remain as resilient as it was this past year? Unfortunately, there's a growing amount of data like the one shown in this chart that consumers are adopting a more cautious mindset, and that spend may slow a bit in 2026 as the cumulative effects of higher prices and uncertainty and lower wage growth weigh on consumers' decisions. But ultimately, we do expect consumers will continue to adapt to the, if you will, normalization of uncertainty that surrounds them. We expect them to pursue a balance of value, relevance, and simplicity when making purchase decisions, making them not only based on financial reasons, but on an emotional level as well. In other words, purchases in 2026 each and every purchase is going to have to earn its place in a consumer's mindset. Now I'm going to hand things over to Shana for another perspective on bifurcation and uncertainty.
Thanks, Bernie. So now we're going to look at how brands are navigating bifurcation and uncertainty. And let's start with the big picture here. Right now, we're seeing a real bifurcation in the market where brands are winning either by leaning clearly into value or leaning confidently into premium. Where brands are really struggling is in the middle, and that squeeze middle that you'll see on the side is where those mixed signals live. And this is happening because pricing is often saying one thing, but experience is saying another, and consumers are really feeling that confusion immediately. When we look at the value side, success isn't really just about being affordable. It's about transparent pricing, loyalty perks, and those strong private label innovations. But on the premium side, growth is coming from that white glove experience, exclusivity, and VIP treatment. The key takeaway here is that brands really need to make a clear choice. The middle does work, but really only when it's reframed as smart premium, not watered down value. So this is really where we're seeing brands gain momentum. Across categories, value brands are leaning heavily into loyalty programs, and these loyalty programs aren't really just discounts for the sake of discounts. We're seeing loyalty things like cash back in store, travel and partner site discounts, fuel perks, app upgrades, all things that actually improve the customer experience. And another big driver here is that own brands are giving out gifts and that for private labels, which help introduce trial, but they're also reinforcing loyalty for consumers at the same time. And I think what's really important here is that these perks don't feel gimmicky. To consumers, they really feel useful, consistent, and they're easy to understand. And so all of those things are really helping drive adoption and repeat behavior by consumers. But we do know that value alone isn't enough. To really win over consumers, value brands need to build trust, and trust starts with clarity. So when brands are empowering consumers with transparent pricing and upfront breakdowns, it's really giving people a sense of control. They feel like they know what they're paying for and why they're paying for it. And then we're also seeing strong engagement with interactive tools. And these are things like calculators, quizzes, and side-by-side comparisons. And these tools are really helping meet consumers where they are in their purchase journey, and it also helps remove friction from their decision making. The key idea with that is that honest pricing signals fairness, and to consumers, fairness is a huge driver of loyalty, especially in the uncertain economic moments that we're currently experiencing. But on the other end of that is the spectrum of luxury. So even though we have those economic uncertainty happening, luxury growth is also still happening at the same time. We do see e-commerce play a role here, but it doesn't play the strongest role. Actually, just under 40% of consumers prefer to purchase their luxury items through an e-commerce platform. So that's really showing us that consumers want an in-person experience for luxury. And what's really interesting about this is that this growth isn't coming from broad accessibility for luxury. It's coming from brands that are really intentional about how and where they're showing up. So luxury consumers are still spending, but they're definitely being selective, thoughtful, and more experience driven in how they do it. And that brings us to what luxury brands really need to do to sustain their growth, and that's protect the exclusivity that they've built. We're really seeing luxury win when it creates desire through their limited edition releases, that small batch production, and then those exclusive collaborations. Scarcity isn't a tactic for luxury brands here. It's actually just a part of their story. So strong luxury brands are also investing heavily in that consistent storytelling that's promoting things like heritage and craftsmanship, timelessness, all things that are reinforcing why luxury brands are worth the premium. And then finally, that experience layer, and this comes with those VIP programs, personal stylist, and concierge style service. The high touch personalizations that those offer is really what's turning consumers into loyalists and then advocates for those luxury brands. So to close it out, we're definitely seeing a shift towards value reflected clearly across industries. Travel, automotive, personal care, pharma, and especially food and beverage are all increasing their value-focused messaging year over year. And while some of these categories are seeing dramatic lifts, which signals just how central value has become to brand communication, the broader takeaway from this is that in a market that's defined by uncertainty, consumers are definitely gravitating towards brands that are really clear about who they are. So whether that's like value with transparency or luxury with exclusivity, brands that are winning are ones that really commit and communicate their commitment consistently. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who's going to wrap up the key takeaways on bifurcation and uncertainty.
All right, thank you, Shana. Yeah, so to wrap up some of the great points that both Bernie and Shana made earlier in the section, the first point is around polarized spending. I mean, we're seeing a clear trend where higher income households are really prioritizing things like premium and luxury experiences, where lower income households are focused on things like value, pricing, transparency, and loyalty. While Shana did note that brands in that economic middle can succeed, I will say that they definitely face the largest risk. Brands that don't really authentically choose a side tend to lose efficiency and wind up driving costs for themselves. It's incredibly valuable to lean one way or the other without just kind of existing in that middle ground, because mixed value and premium signals tend to weaken performance overall. As Shana called out, we're seeing a real shift in messaging priority. We're seeing that many categories are leaning harder into that value-based messaging. But what's interesting is that value can kind of live on both sides of the aisle. We see value against lower income consumers, but also there's value to be had in those higher income premium experiences. Finding value in that added cost is important to people as well. But at the end of the day, when you're leaning into value, you need to have trust along with that. It's now required for that messaging to really resonate. So what does that mean for media? I think it's important that to appropriately target either a value or a luxury segment, you have to have very clear audience segmentation, knowing who your audience is and segmenting them in a way that you can message them, with creative and target them appropriately is important. And to do that, having really strong first-party behavioral and intent signal data really helps drive that segmentation.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sheena. I think that's a really interesting point around the very real media cost of not knowing your brand and taking perhaps an inauthentic strategic approach. So layered onto this economic divide that we just discussed is another transformative force, and that, of course, is AI. AI is reshaping how businesses operate and how consumers discover, how they evaluate and engage with brands. So some things to keep in mind here. First, AI is rapidly evolving into core infrastructure, powering automated workflows and scalable intelligence. And AI is lowering the barrier of entry for smaller and challenger brands and also for startups. Consumers increasingly use AI for shopping, research, and information gathering, yet healthy skepticism remains around long-term impact and value. And then finally, a watch out for marketers. Universal approaches will increasingly fall short here. Rapidly evolving competitive markets demand brands offer the flexible purchase, payment, and loyalty choices that consumers expect. So I'll pass the baton over to Gwen.
Thanks, Jen.
Not that long ago, AI still lived on the edges, a pilot here, a tool there. But what's changed is it's moved into the core of how companies actually operate. So the advantage isn't just adoption anymore, it's depth. So, how embedded is AI across workflows, teams, and decision making? And most companies are still really early in this process, and ROI is uneven, but that gap is really the opportunity. Because as AI scales, speed and coordination become the real differentiators, and the brands pulling ahead aren't treating AI like a feature, they're treating it like infrastructure. So, what does that mean for marketing? AI is taking on more execution, which means human teams move up the value chain. Strategy, orchestration, judgment. Planning can't be static anymore. It becomes continuous calibration. So, the real advantage becomes insight velocity. How quickly can you learn, adapt, and align? And teams that can do that well will outperform those stuck in rigid cycles. And it raises the bar on upskilling because execution alone isn't just enough anymore. But this isn't just a marketing story, obviously. So you'll notice from the chart retail, finance, healthcare, travel, different applications, but the same pattern: faster decisions, greater efficiency, and overall higher expectations. And the big thing is once consumers experience that level of responsiveness in one category, they start expecting it everywhere. And then here's where it gets more intense. AI lowers barriers to entry so challengers can scale faster and optimize faster. This means that they compete on experience and not just spend. So disruption isn't just coming from your direct competitors anymore, it's coming from substitutes, platforms, and even adjacent categories. So when that differentiation isn't clear, brands become vulnerable, and winning now requires meaning, trust, and experience, not just availability. And the biggest takeaway here is when you get a competitive report from us now, that's just one piece of the competitive that's out there. And to dig in that a little deeper, this is where substitution becomes real. So when brands don't clearly articulate value, these good enough alternatives make switching easy. Circular commerce, resale, private labels, dupes, they're all expanding the competitive set. So again, that report you used to get is just one piece of the puzzle. Industry lines are blurring, so you're not just defending share anymore, you're defending relevance. And now I will hand things over to Sarah, who's going to bring this down to the consumer level.
Awesome. Thank you, Gwen. So before we talk about opportunity for consumers in AI, we have to acknowledge the tension we are seeing right now in the landscape. AI adoption is rising, but comfort has not caught up at all. Right now, about 50% of Americans say they're more concerned than excited about the increased use of AI in daily life. So even as usage grows, emotional hesitation is still very much real. We see this especially among women. 55% say they're more concerned compared to 45% of men. And we see this too in our older cohorts, particularly 50 plus are increasingly nervous compared to some of those younger generations. And when we look at what's driving that concern, it's not abstract fear, it's real practical issues. We have 33% that are citing inaccurate output, 24% mentioning performance issues, another 24% worry about privacy, 23% point to the lack of transparency, and 18% bring up bias or fairness. So, with that, consumers aren't outright rejecting AI. They're saying, prove to me that it's accurate, secure, and mostly fair for me to use. But here's what makes this interesting. Even with that nervousness, usage continues to climb. 53% of consumers are now either actively experimenting with Gen AI or using it regularly, which is up from 38% just last year. So that's some significant growth, especially for some of our more nervous consumers. And what's even more interesting is that 90% of Americans are using AI on their phones, but only 38% are actually realize they're using it. I'm not sure if you've noticed, I definitely have, but AI is definitely embedded into our everyday behavior, whether you realize it or not. So if we focus in on those actively using Gen AI, 51% say they use it every day, and another 38% use it at least weekly. So this tells us it's not novelty behavior anymore. It's really becoming part of our everyday routine. And at the same time, trust is gradually moving in somewhat the right direction. 43% now say they trust the information AI tools provide, which is up from 40% last year. But only 14% say they trust it completely with no ifs, ands, or buts. So what we're seeing here is a real gap. Adoption is moving faster than trust, and consumers are integrating AI into their daily life, but they're still deciding how much confidence they really want to put in it. So when we look at how consumers are actually using AI, the story becomes much more functional. 62% use it for general information or research assistance, 46% use it for work, and 43% use it to research brands or different products. This tells us that AI is becoming embedded in decision-making moments like information gathering, productivity, shopping research. But what stands out is that nearly half of users now rely on AI for work, which signals that growing dependence on AI-enabled productivity and automation. As reliance grows, expectations are naturally going to grow with this. Gwen touched on this a bit. Consumers are increasingly viewing AI as just a baseline capability. And what I mean by that is they expect it to be fast, useful, personalized, and especially reliable. So, with that, the new consumer reality isn't fear or enthusiasm. It's really just cautious integration. They're nervous, they're using it anyway, and they're forming expectations really, really fast. So this is a perfect example of the mentality of AI adoption. We won't be diving into the retail space today, but I think the adoption of omnichannel shopping perfectly shows the current AI mentality. When it comes to omnichannel adoption, especially in the early phases of this, there wasn't really a one-size-fits-all mentality. Consumers adopted this in many different ways, with some preferring certain options over others and vice versa. We have different purchase channel options, deliveries, payments, subscription or loyalty programs. These are all portions of the omni-channel approach where consumers have different preferences. And AI really needs to be the same here. There needs to be options for our very excited consumers, but then also options for our nervous consumers and everyone in between. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dan Delosier to bring together what we've discussed on the new consumer reality.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so to recap the section that Sarah and Gwen just talked about, we're in an interesting place with AI, right? We're seeing adoption grow despite very clear skepticism, as called out earlier. Consumers are really focused on things like general research, recommendations, and everyday tasks. And when using AI, they expect those AI-powered experiences to be fast, helpful, and personalized, and have little to no tolerance for any level of friction. If they're going to participate in this new frontier, they want it to be a seamless experience for them. So executing AI is incredibly important in a very clear, concise, seamless way to drive success. One of the other interesting things that's coming out of AI here is that competitive disruption that was mentioned. AI is really lowering that barrier to entry for smaller brands to enter a competitive space. And along with those small brands, we're seeing brands that we would refer to as dupe brands, brands that offer a very similar product set to a more established brand. So what does that mean from a media standpoint? I think more than ever, signal quality, speed, and flexibility now outweighs scale. So a smaller brand with great data inputs and a lean, kind of quick to market approach can compete with brands that have a much larger budget and a much broader scale. They can get to market quickly and be agile in that space. So because of that, it's important for more established brands to be as agile and flexible more than they've ever been in this space, because the competition entering the space is going to be just as agile and flexible as you, if not more so. So being willing to kind of test and pivot quickly is key here for marketers for sure.
Thank you, Dan. Great points. I am certainly looking forward to digging more into agility in our panel discussion. But first, let's move on to our final topic for today, which is personalization. So building on our last points, consider that in a polarized AI-accelerated marketplace, Growth will hinge on delivering smarter, more responsive personalization that proves its value and earns consumer trust. So some key considerations for marketers here. First, remember consumers expect instant adaptive experiences across touch points, delivering moments that feel relevant, that feel effortless, and are unique to them. Meaningful savings, exclusive benefits, and useful personalization elevate loyalty and drive long-lasting consumer lifetime value. And then finally, visibility and choice empower consumers, deepening trust in your brand by enriching the value that personalization can truly provide. And I'll hand this off to Gwen.
Thanks again. So personalization has moved well beyond being a campaign tactic, and similar to what we were saying with AI, it's really becoming an always-on capability across the enterprise. So AI now makes real-time predictive personalization possible across channels and touch points. And the differentiator isn't whether personalization exists, because almost everybody is doing something nowadays, but the difference is how well it's operationalized. So the brands that are tightly integrating data, analytics, and activation are creating seamless, responsive experiences, and the ones that are simply layering it on top are still struggling. Now, this was something we had a lot of conversations about in our little groups, but one of the more interesting shifts is that B2B expectations are now often higher than B2C. And Shayna kind of talked about some of these tools earlier, but buyers are expecting intuitive portals, relevant recommendations, self-guided journeys, and especially in long, complex purchase cycles. So personalization has to extend across the full journey. It can't just show up at that conversion moment. And tailoring relevance by role makes the buying process smoother and more confident. And this is where brands either simplify complexity or lose momentum. And the performance impacts, like you can see here, is real. So when audience, message, and moment all align, conversion improves, retention improves, lifetime value improves. But on the flip side, irrelevant messaging doesn't only get ignored, it actually hurts performance. So this isn't about doing more, it's about doing fewer things better at the right time. So essentially precision over volume. And as budgets tighten, efficiency matters more than reach alone. So personalization helps us reduce waste by focusing on timing and relevance. Smarter activation often outperforms higher spend, especially as we're talking about competition intensifying. So we're moving away from scale as being that default growth lever and toward smarter orchestration. Then here's the tension point. Most organizations understand all of this, but execution still lags ambition. So the gap between leaders and everyone else is widening, driven by differences in data readiness, technology integration, and operating models. Scaling personalization takes alignment and patience, and intent isn't enough anymore. And then finally, control. So passive personalization really improves efficiency, but active personalization builds trust. So preference centers, configurators, flexible options, these tools let people shape what they see and how they engage. When consumers feel involved in the experience, trust actually increases, and trust drives conversion and even loyalty. But when personalization feels like it's happening to someone instead of for them, that's when value disappears. So I'm going to toss things back to Sarah, who's going to bring this back to the consumers again.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So as Gwen showed us very well, personalization absolutely works, but only when value is very clear. Consumers don't want personalization just for the sake of it. They don't want more messages, more notifications, more noise. They simply want relevance. They want value, but the challenge here is transparency. Less than 10% of consumers say they truly understand how their data is being used, and that lack of understanding fuels skepticism. On top of that, 45% report negative reactions to personalization, largely because it feels intrusive or really uneasy for them. So the issue isn't personalization itself, It's personalization that feels extractive instead of beneficial. When it's done correctly, consumers respond best to personalization that delivers clear and practical value. So if you take a look at the chart here, we see consumers preferring personalization in the forms of rewards and loyalty programs, content recommendations, purchase guidance. So all that to say, for consumers, the most effective personalization doesn't feel intrusive. It feels like savings, convenience, or just smarter decision making. So if personalization really works when value is clear, the next question becomes, how do brands close the relevance gap? Consumers are wary of data use, so personalization must feel value-led and privacy-conscious, not surveillant. While many consumers say experiences are becoming more personalized, fewer than 30% strongly agree. And while 83% say they're open to personalized offers, only 44% say the offers they receive are truly relevant. That's a massive opportunity gap. And when personalization misses the mark, consumers default to price over precision. What's interesting here, though, is that most respondents do see benefits from new features and personalization. Around 44 to 48% somewhat agree that updates are thoughtfully designed and experiences are more personalized than compared to last year, and that the new features do improve their lives. But really strong agreement lags, with only about a quarter strongly agreeing here. So personalization today is progressing, but it's really not impressing. This is where AI becomes powerful as an engine by helping close the relevance gap by optimizing timing, context, and really clarity. This just helps deliver personalization that actually feels helpful rather than invasive. So in this reality, again, personalization is not about noise, but about how you clearly return value. And for the last time, I'm going to throw it over to Dan to close us out on personalization.
All right, thank you. So what we're seeing here is that personalization is no longer really a differentiator for brands. It's expected to be just a basic competence at this point. People expect personalization from the brands they engage with. And that impact that brands can have via personalization is really dependent upon multiple things, not just creative, but also the data they're using, the media, and the customer experience that users are dealing with when they go throughout the whole marketing flow. Additionally, value exchange is really determining or really impacting trust. Consumers are weighing that perceived value they're getting against the data and privacy that they have to give up to get the personalization. And if they don't have a very clear value from the personalization they're getting, it starts to feel invasive to them, and it's a turnoff and can really be a bad look for your brand. So handling it in a way that ensures that clear value exchange for consumers is incredibly important. Finally, giving consumers that perception of control can really help drive trust. So when there's passive personalization, it can definitely improve efficiency, but it's going to limit trust and loyalty because ultimately that passive personalization just makes the brand itself look smart. When you're giving control to the consumer and visibility and choice, you're actually making that consumer themselves feel smart and part of the conversation. And it really helps build that long-term relationship with them, and overall, just a better long-term experience for that consumer. So from a media implication standpoint, a couple things that pop out here is that personalization must feel intentional across channels and not just be siloed. So think about it like this. If you were running on social media and you do a perfect job of personalizing your creative to a consumer, but then don't do anything from a personalization standpoint on OTT and OLV, there's going to be confusion on the consumer's part. They're going to be, it's going to be unclear to them why they're getting a personalized message here, but not over here in these other channels. So being intentional across channels is very important. And finally, looking at success, I think it's very easy to think about engagement when it comes to personalization. Did we see a higher CTR because we're delivering a very, specific surgical message to this one group of people? And while that's interesting, ultimately, I think what's more important for the long-term health of your business is thinking about things like incrementality and lifetime value. Is personalization driving that real relationship with a consumer and building long-term trust and value, which pays off over the years and not just in that fleeting moment of a CTR jump?
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate the insight that effective personalization is truly a value exchange between brands and consumers. So this concludes the presentation portion of our time together this afternoon. And now we are going to move into our panel discussion, What's Next for Marketers? This discussion will be led by the other Dan, Dan Cox. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Jen. I know our panelists enjoy this perhaps the most, what we call the speed round of our trends presentation. So we will dive right in. Topic number one. And when I'm finished asking anyone from the panel, just feel free to hop right in. So with continued economic uncertainty, which was mentioned a lot in the first section, a growing purchase divide, and consumers seeking both value and premium products and experiences, what brands do you all see effectively navigating these challenges, and how are they doing that?
Hey, Dan, I can jump in. So I feel like consumers aren't really seeing value as being cheap anymore. They're actually seeing it as being smart. And a few quick brands that come to mind are like Aldi, IKEA, maybe even Costco. Brands that I think really have demonstrated their value and quality to consumers, but they still feel affordable with their products at the same time. And then also for a lot of QSR brands, they've tapped into the meal deals and the promotions that have risen very quickly. And it's kind of sparked a deal hunter mentality amongst consumers, especially those that are looking for the best bang for their buck with the economic uncertainty. But value isn't just about price. It's, about other things too. We think about saving time, ease of purchase, like having a faster checkout experience or being able to find information you're looking for really quickly. Those things still really bring value to consumers too.
So true, Shana, about those faster and easier experiences for consumers. I will literally not go through with a purchase on my phone if it does not take Apple Pay. So totally agree there.
No, I totally agree. And then really just quickly, before we move on to the next topic on the luxury side of things, I just wanted to say that premium brands are also creating value because they're justifying how people are paying for them with things like, status or longevity, emotion. I think some really good brands here are like Lululemon or Alo, those luxury athletic apparel brands. You're never really going to see them, discount their products. You're just going to see a lot of, the same product line, maybe in different colors. But consumers are still really sold on the quality and trendiness of those brands, and it helps them justify those, bigger ticket purchases.
And then, if no one else, I had a couple of thoughts on this as well. I'd like to share, but instead of giving you the brand first, I'd like to answer the how part of your question, if I could, from my perspective. The brands that are doing this well or will do this effectively are the ones that have that robust customer segmentation that Dan alluded to earlier in the presentation. And I think that's because the split, the bifurcation that we talked about earlier isn't so neat and simple. It's not just about higher income versus lower income or value versus premium kind of things. It's a little more nuanced, and truly effective brands are, aware of that, and they're adopting that more nuanced approach, both in their positioning and their messaging, and they're agile about it. They're recognizing that things are changing, economic conditions, the way consumers are feeling changes at different times. That all goes into it. Now to jump back on the brand side of things, one that I would think that's actually doing it pretty well, and it probably isn't the one that I think many people might think of. It's Walmart, and I think they're doing a good job because certainly they've tried and successfully done so, broaden their appeal to a more upscale shopper through both their new messaging campaign with Walmart Plus and other things. But they've done that without sacrificing or being true to their always low prices kind of things, and being the source to go to for people who are seeking low prices as well. So that's one example I'd throw out there.
Great, Bernie. Appreciate all these examples. And also, Bernie, 10 bonus points for citing a brand that clearly understands and embraces the measurable benefit that Walton Goggins brings to pretty much any equation. I also want to acknowledge for this small, intimate group of people that I thought his name was Walter Goggins until 3 weeks ago. So Bernie saved me from that in a conversation. And now I just told you anyways, so I don't know why I told that story. On to topic 2. So knowing personalization and control are completely critical for consumers. What are some non-negotiables that brands and marketers need to make sure that they deliver upon in today's environment?
I can hop in here.
Sure.
So brands and marketers need to be transparent about how they're using data to generate and deliver those personalized messages. These messages need to truly resonate with customers on a very personal level to really achieve that maximum impact that you're looking for. That means communicating with consumers in a more conversational manner instead of just talking at them. This type of approach is really critical to have a brand be seen as authentic in consumers' minds. But then with transparency, there also needs to be clear value in exchange for data. Consumers are really looking for fair trade here, where if they share their personal data, they want meaningful benefits in return. And then on top of this, they need to understand how their data is used and really just feel in control of their personalization. Really, at the end of the day, privacy, clarity, and transparency is not optional. It's a foundation to your brand's trust.
Really, really great point about communicating with consumers versus talking at them. I feel like that's, especially with younger consumers, that's more and more prevalent from what I'm seeing in campaigns that we coordinate.
Absolutely.
Dan, on that front, any thoughts on how we would apply that to a media strategy and our thought processes there?
Yeah, for sure. I think, when we approach personalization, there's a pretty linear flow throughout the planning process. Using strong first-party data is going to enable more granular audience segmentation opportunities, allowing you to really target, I'll call them real customers, based on their purchase behavior and not just like a guess, if you will. When you get beyond that first-party data, you can leverage AI to expand segmentation. Think about anybody buying in a platform. You have to sort through thousands or tens of thousands of potential audience segments in a Meta or a Trade Desk, and you're basing these audience you're building off of inherent knowledge of what you know about the client, right? But if you can leverage AI to programmatically tease out audiences that not only align with the very obvious description of a brand's audience, but I would say tangential audiences that also make sense that perhaps a human might not think of in the moment. It allows you to really get that granular look and granular segmentation that you're looking for from an audience standpoint. And then ultimately, that the segmentation that you're able to pull, you can unlock scalable personalization across all these different segments, and you can have tailored messaging. You can have unique landing page experiences for these users, leveraging things like dynamic creative or manual creative assignments. So there's a lot of opportunity here, much of which is powered by AI. But I think you can really go from start to finish in the planning process with a focus on personalization and drive some great results.
So really, that authenticity and how we talk to people still as important as ever. Smart segmentation.
That's so true, Dan. Authentic. That's so true.
Yeah. And I guess the whole thing is AI helps us to scale it, make it quicker, more consistent, more reliable, but we cannot lose the authenticity and the segmentation. So all of that makes a lot of sense. Any other things to add to that topic before we move on to topic 3? I don't have any more Walton Goggins things to add, so I'm good. All right, seeing none, topic 3. All right, so with speed and flexibility being such critical currencies today, more important than ever, how are marketers and media agencies enhancing their go-to-market and optimization speed, but while not losing and maintaining that custom quality output that clients expect? And then also, what can our clients do to help support speed and flexibility? What can brands do?
I can
Take this one.
something. I'm sorry. I don't mean to bogart the mic. Go ahead.
I'm just trying to get my participation award, Bernie, so thank you.
Hop in, Gwen.
So I'll speak about us first. So for us, speed isn't just about moving faster for the sake of it. It's really about removing some of those friction points. So behind the scenes, we're using structured data sets, automation, and AI to help answer some of those basic questions, like historical spend, channel mix, or benchmarks. And then that really frees up the team to spend time thinking about the things that matter and really drive impact. And we also like to stay really close to our media partners as new opportunities emerge. So we can try to see what's worth testing and what's kind of just noise. And this allows us to test thoughtfully instead of reactively. And then from the client side, speed really works best when it's shared with us and the clients. So when we have clear goals, flexible guardrails, and a real test and learn mindset, when we have that alignment, we can move quickly without sacrificing any quality. So not to go back to something I said earlier, but for us, it's not just about doing it faster. It's about, spending more time on the things that drive impact. And sorry, Bernie, I'll toss it back to you.
No, I think it was smart to let you go, Gwen. Your answer is better than what I had in mind. But what I would just add on to that or reinforce, I think like your test and learn suggestion is key. Clients can help by embracing really like that agile kind of wanting to explore things, even stuff that may be true, totally new, unproven. I'm on the research side of things here. You learn from everything that you do, even when you have results in survey or data that comes back that isn't necessarily the most favorable initially. You're learning. Everything that you do allows you to, and if you try something and it doesn't work, then you go, okay, that's just one thing that didn't work. Now I can move on and I can find the thing that actually does it. So, embracing that old adage of, fail fast, learn faster kind of thing, that would really help in these kinds of situations.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well here. Great points, both of you guys. When I think speed and flexibility, the first thing that comes to mind is AI. And I think it has the potential to be a really valuable asset. Operationally, I think everyone's goal is to eliminate, I'll call them repetitive time consuming tasks, right? And I think no one's quite there yet, but I think it's, aspirationally, that's where we're all trying to head. And I think there's an opportunity to, once that's achieved, look for opportunities to repurpose that time into more strategic thinking and more QA. As we look to go faster to market, having a stronger QA presence is never a bad thing, right? Fast and accurate. We want them to go hand in hand for sure. But AI can also help with other things for sure, like audience building, channel selection. When you think about creative, you can do creative iteration, storyboarding, even development at this point, as well as in-market insights. So I think beyond just like the elimination of repetitive tasks, there's some like real-world AI things that can be leveraged from a planning and strategy process to get you to a place faster, get you to market faster with real strong data behind it. And I think I do want to also lean in on the what can clients do to help support speed and flexibility. I think an important one here is kind of a combination of agencies like us and clients and creative agencies all working together from a creative standpoint. I think it's our job to accurately communicate timelines and what we need and when. But as we try to move faster and try to do things like personalization, on the client side and on the creative agency side, having that creative ready to go in the moment when we're ready to execute on that is vitally important. So again, end to end working as an agency through the client, through the creative agency to ensure those timelines are hit, I think it is a huge value when we're trying to go faster in a more personalized way.
Really love these themes. Anyone else?
Yeah, the only thing I would just add on, I just would reinforce, and I think Sarah did this throughout most of our sections. What we on the agency side and even on the client side have to do, make sure we keep an eye as well on the customer kind of side of things and how they're going to accept all it. Simply because we can do it, sometimes you have to stop and ask, should we be doing it? Is our customer really wanting this? How are they receiving this? Is it going to be helpful for them and stuff like that? So that's the one last thing I would just add there.
Yeah, I love that, Bernie. I say that all the time when I think about AI. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think the idea of the benefits AI bring are great, but it's our judgment, it's our partnerships, it's our critical thinking that make the outputs of this most meaningful and strategic and beneficial. So it's important for us to continue leaning into these things, not just deferring to them. I think that's a great way to bring this home. As we move to wrap up, we've got 5 minutes left, so I think it's a good time to close things out. So just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to the presenters for your great content, your great conversation, great personalities, great outfits. Thank you to the audience. I will say the same things about you, but I can't see you. I'm sure you're all dressed very sharply today. Any final questions that you have throughout this presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can circle back and get you answers. Additionally, over the next few days, you are going to be receiving a copy of this presentation and this recording. So you will get a lot of those answers. But if you have any additional questions, you want to dive deeper into any topics, whether now or they pop into your head later, just reach out. We are happy to provide those. In terms of our next webinar for Harmelin, April 16th, we would love for you to join us. We have a webinar focused on influencer marketing in the age of AI. So AI returns, and this is about authenticity that performs. So looking forward to seeing you all there, and thank you for being here today. Have a wonderful afternoon.
You.